everybody, I'm Dan Murrell, and today I want to look at some of the theories, you could call them conspiracy theories, that have been spreading online about the box office performance and the attendance of the Odyssey, as well as some of the ratings that you may have seen on various websites. Even though the Odyssey had an opening weekend that exceeded expectations and a second weekend representing the best hold ever for a movie opening over $100 million domestically, there have been all kinds of posts that you can find on social media sites and elsewhere that have said that the movie is actually not performing the way that you've been told. Now, I often hear when I discuss these things that it's not worth exposing these theories to the light of day. But here's the thing. These aren't just confined to dark corners of the internet. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are being amplified through YouTube and social media to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and sometimes millions of people. So this isn't an attempt to shame or take on the ones spreading these theories. It's an attempt to provide some perspective and some facts to those out there who are hearing them. I want to dig down a little bit deeper and see where the truth lies in some of these claims. And let's start with the most prevalent thing I've seen online about the Odyssey recently, and maybe the one that you're most likely to have seen. It's a story that originated last week with a Reddit post claiming that the audience score that you see on Rotten Tomatoes is not the true audience score. This theory was boosted by none other than Elon Musk on his X account and has been covered elsewhere by news outlets, YouTube channels, and a lot of other places. And it all alleges that the audience data on Rotten Tomatoes can't be trusted. Let's start with the Reddit post itself, which appeared several days ago on the subreddit Kotaku in Action, which lists itself as the main hub for Gamergate on Reddit. The user claimed that the, at that time, 97% verified audience score on Rotten Tomatoes was inaccurate because it included what the poster labeled as push data. Now, to briefly summarize what push data is, prior to 2019, Rotten Tomatoes user ratings were generated entirely by users going to the website, registering an account, and rating a movie. This is what the post calls pull data, reviews from users who proactively went to Rotten Tomatoes and rated a film. In 2019, Rotten Tomatoes introduced the verified audience rating, which includes data from users who the site can confirm have actually bought a ticket. After a film has concluded, viewers who bought a ticket through Fandango, the owner of Rotten Tomatoes, receive a notification to rate what they've just seen on a 1 to 5 star scale. This user-generated ratings data is what you see on the website as the verified audience rating. Rotten Tomatoes' intent in making this change was to provide what the site believed was a more accurate reflection of moviegoer opinion, set apart from anyone who might want to artificially deflate or inflate the audience score of a movie. But Rotten Tomatoes did not eliminate a user's ability to go to their website and leave a review without ticket verification. Now you can see two audience ratings for every movie on Rotten Tomatoes: the verified audience score, which consists of the push data from verified ticket buyers, and the all audience score, which is a combination of the push data from Fandango users and the poll data from users who have reviewed the film on the site but did not have verified ticket purchases. Now, if you want to make the argument that the all audience score, which combines the two sets of data, is potentially more reflective of actual audience sentiment, I'd hear that argument, but the all audience score is not what is proposed in this Reddit post as the, quote, real audience score for the Odyssey. To obtain the real Rotten Tomatoes audience score, the Reddit poster accessed the site's JSON code, which is basically part of the bones of the website, the backend that makes everything run. Think of it like being able to see the green lines of code in the Matrix instead of people. As the post itself notes, anybody can do this. It's not hacking. All you have to do is right-click on the Odyssey review page and select View Page Source. And in that data, which you can see on your screen right now, you get the raw number of votes that have been used to generate both audience ratings. Now, this data is accurate as of Tuesday night, when I did final prep on this video, so it's not the exact same set that was used in the original post. The top set of code on your screen shows the all audience ratings, both verified and unverified users. You can see that the liked count, the number of users who rated the Odyssey positively, is 19,357, and the not liked count is 1,425, which translates to an all audience score of 93%, which is what's displayed on the website. The second set of code on your screen is the verified audience data, which shows the ratings from verified ticket buyers only. The total number of ratings for those users is 17,959 liked, 566 not liked, which translates to a 97% verified audience score on the website. In order to find what the Reddit user called the real audience score, the solution was to completely throw out all of the verified ratings, leaving only the unverified ratings. And when you throw out only the verified rating data, as of Tuesday, the audience score consists of 1,398 likes and 859 dislikes out of 2,257 total ratings. A score of about 62%, which is lower than the audience scores, but still barely in fresh territory. But my question is, why is the quote-unquote real user rating determined by throwing out all of the users who have verified that they've actually seen the movie? The reasoning in the original Reddit post is pretty threadbare. The user says simply, quote, "The current generated 97% score displayed so prominently is simply an artifact of a push notification pipeline heavily biased towards opening weekend ticket buyers." But isn't that the point of a verified user rating? To gauge the opinion of ticket buyers? And interestingly, the real audience score has risen since that post was initially made. A week ago, it was at a rotten 56%, and now it's at a fresh 62%, which means that positive ratings from unverified users in the last several days have significantly outpaced unverified negative ratings. Basically, using this method to determine the quote-unquote real Rotten Tomatoes audience score just means that you're discarding any rating, positive or negative, from a verified ticket buyer, and only counting unverified ratings that can be cast by anyone, whether they bought a ticket or not. That, to me, does not constitute a movie's real rating. If anything, I view that number with more suspicion than any other number on the site, because it's basically just a return to the days when audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes were completely disconnected from whether anyone had actually seen the movie or not. Rotten Tomatoes is not a perfect site, and I have my issues with how their binary review data is both presented and interpreted, but in my opinion, this method of determining the audience score is fundamentally flawed. And the way this story has been covered has only added to the situation. Yahoo Entertainment aggregated a report asking, is Rotten Tomatoes hiding bad reviews for the Odyssey? Despite the fact that there was no allegation that the site was doing that in the original post. And other YouTubers and influencers have spun the story as Rotten Tomatoes getting caught rigging or manipulating the user score, which again, isn't even alleged in the original post. If you want to believe that only counting unverified reviews is the real audience score, that's fine. You do you. But as somebody who works with box office and audience data on a weekly basis, I think it is far from being the number that best reflects reality and is in fact the easiest to distort what actual audience opinion is. Speaking of distorted reality, let's get to the second most prevalent conspiracy theory I've seen, and it's an oldie, but a goodie. We'll get back to audience ratings in a minute, but I want to talk about the claim that the ticket sales for the Odyssey aren't real. Essentially, that Universal is buying tickets to make the film look successful, and that movie theaters are actually sitting far emptier than what you'll see online when you book your ticket. This one was also very prevalent when Captain Marvel was released back in 2019. After months of crusading against the movie and its star Brie Larson, many social media users and YouTubers began spreading claims that far fewer people were actually going to see the movie than the box office figures showed. These claims, then and now, were supported by anonymous online posts and sometimes pictures of reportedly empty auditoriums at Showtime, with no real way to verify the veracity of those claims. Now, this one is tough to tackle because almost any evidence for or against this theory is going to be anecdotal. For example, I was at an IMAX screening of the Odyssey last Thursday that showed sold out online and was indeed sold out. But search online and you'll see plenty of people saying, I've heard reports of empty theaters, or people are saying theaters are empty. So I decided to generate a report of my own. In a community post here on the channel, I asked movie theater managers and employees to contact me to help me with research for an upcoming video about box office. I specifically didn't mention the Odyssey because I wanted to make sure that anyone who contacted me had no motivation for or against the film going into it. When I received a reply, I asked all of them a simple question. Have you seen any instances where crowd turnout for the Odyssey didn't match the number of tickets sold? Has foot traffic been out of sync with the large box office numbers that are being reported? Now, I have to tip my cap to the people who responded because I got over 40 replies coming from states all across the country. I got replies from employees at the 3 biggest theater chains in the US, from smaller regional chains, from the most prominent dine-in chain in the US, and from several independent theaters. Some were showing the Odyssey in IMAX, some offered a mix of premium and standard auditoriums, and some theaters were only showing the movie in standard formats. I even got a reply from 2 theaters showing the film in 70mm IMAX, and in addition to employees in the US, I also received multiple replies from employees of the biggest theater chain in Canada and the biggest theater chain in the UK. Overall, I received feedback from 7 countries on 3 continents, and all of them told me the same thing. Nobody at any theater of any size, in any format, in any city or country, reported anything anomalous about the size of the crowds. Everyone, from theater managers to ticket takers, said that the number of people that showed up has matched the number of tickets sold. Many of these theater workers said that this has been one of the busiest times since COVID, with large crowds and increasing walk-up ticket sales after opening weekend. The feedback about format was also consistent. IMAX screenings have been at or near capacity since the movie opened every day. Premium formats like Dolby Cinema and RPX have also seen very healthy ticket sales, often selling out as well. The only reports I've seen of lower ticket sales were for standard formats. But even for the lower selling standard screenings, there were no reported anomalies in attendance. Many even said that they'd spoken to other theater workers who also reported nothing unusual. These were some of the words they used to describe claims that Universal was buying tickets and that people weren't showing up. Quote, absolutely not the case, crazy, odd, and ridiculous. This is my favorite quote I got from a theater worker, and it comes from somebody working at a major theater in the heart of London, showing the Odyssey in multiple formats, including IMAX. They said, quote, people online can debate the truth behind whether these empty screens are real, if the studio is actually buying out tickets or whatever. Thing is, the cinema staff, us on the ground, we're working crazy hours to meet demand for this film. We're doing 10-hour, sometimes longer shifts. The 40 minutes from one Odyssey in IMAX to the next are like the most intense 40 minutes you could ever experience, from cleaning the screen to serving concessions to even trying to get 700 people to sit in the correct seats. And then while the film is on, yes, it's much more quiet, but then we're preparing for the next big rush in the background. These aren't anonymous claims. These are people with names and email addresses who almost always provided the name and location of the theaters where they work, and I thank them for helping me out here. And even if you want to dismiss the reports that I received, some of the anecdotal evidence on the other side doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. For example, in an X post supporting the fake audience theory, a user posted a picture of themselves in an empty theater on what they claimed was the Odyssey's opening day. Now, I can't prove whether that was or wasn't the case, but I can prove two things. Number one, that the theater is a standard format theater, which, as we've heard, is a format with lower ticket sales. And number two, that the theater itself is in Croatia, based on the translated text from the on-screen advertisement in the photo. And I can also note that the Odyssey did not, in fact, flop in Croatia. It had the second biggest opening of the year and the biggest for any Hollywood film. And here's what the 7 o'clock IMAX screening of the Odyssey looks like tonight at Sinistar Arena IMAX in Zagreb. Not a lot of empty seats. So we'll talk about a few other things in a minute, but briefly, of all the conspiracy theories I thought I'd find researching this video, one of them features the last thing I expected: me. A user on Twitter posted a screenshot of my review on Rotten Tomatoes, which appears to have loaded on his or her screen twice in a row, saying, quote, multiple critics are uploading the exact same review word for word twice on Rotten Tomatoes just to push the Odyssey's critic score higher. The audience already showed what they think with that trailer. No amount of copy-paste review is going to change that, end quote. Now, with these other theories, I can only offer my own analysis of the data and the research that I've done with other people, but this one I can definitively refute. So, did I post my Odyssey review twice to boost the Rotten Tomatoes score? No, because Rotten Tomatoes doesn't post my reviews. I post my reviews. I pick the quote, I provide the rating, I input the data, and I submit it myself. And not only didn't I post it twice, I can't post it twice. If you need proof, here's my critic page on Rotten Tomatoes, where you can see that the Odyssey is listed one time only. You know how Nietzsche said that if you gaze into the abyss long enough, it eventually gazes back at you? I didn't fully appreciate that sentiment until today. Okay, let's return to user scores, which have been a consistent point of contention, not only how they're calculated, but how legitimate they are. This theory goes to several posts on social media I found comparing the IMDb, Letterboxd, Metacritic, and Rotten Tomatoes audience scores. The post claims that Rotten Tomatoes is, quote, curating the numbers on the verified audience score of 97% because it is vastly higher. They claim a 50-point gap than what you see on other platforms. The other scores listed in the post are a 5.3 on Metacritic, a 4.3 on Letterboxd, and an 8.3 on IMDb. And so that brings us to our next question. Is the Rotten Tomatoes audience verified score unusually high compared to other sites? First of all, it has to be noted, and I'm going to have this engraved on my tombstone, that a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes does not mean that the audience rated the movie a 97 out of 100. It means that 97% of the audience liked it to some degree. It is a measure of quantity, not quality. Secondly, the post is comparing a percentage to 3 other scores that are on a 1 to 10 scale, which isn't even a comparison. So we'll start by normalizing the numbers across platforms using the latest data from all of these sites. There is a user rating out of 5 on Rotten Tomatoes that is assigned based on reviews, so we'll start there. The Odyssey currently has a 4.8 out of 5 verified audience rating, not percentage, or a 9.6 out of 10 when you convert that number to a 1 to 10 rating scale. The Odyssey currently has an 8.5 out of 10 on IMDb, despite 6.7% of the ratings being 1-star reviews, though that number has declined since the movie opened. Letterboxd is noted as being a considerably lower score because the Odyssey's rating is 4.4, but what the post intentionally, I think, leaves out is that Letterboxd judges movies out of 5. So when you normalize that to a 1 out of 10 scale, it's an 8.8 out of 10. Metacritic is the only platform used where you don't have to adjust the raw data. The user score right now on Metacritic is a 5.4 out of 10. So to recap, these are the 4 numbers that the original tweet says are so suspicious because Rotten Tomatoes is out of step with other platforms, updated to what they currently show. And these are what the user ratings are when you actually show each site's user rating on a 1 to 10 scale. That is not as big of a gap as the post claims, but it should be noted that Metacritic is indeed the outlier here, much lower on a 1 through 10 scale. And as any numbers analyst will tell you, when you have 4 numbers and 1 is an outlier, well then the outlier must be the only one that's reliable. But the Metacritic user score is actually being referred to a lot as the only real or reliable user score, absent throwing out verified ticket data, because it's the only one that's this low. So let's dig into the theory that the Odyssey's Metacritic score is the only one that's trustworthy. As noted, Metacritic is by far the lowest user score of the 4, and it also does not have a verification system, so anyone can leave a rating on the platform. As of last night, there were 2,605 user ratings, with 48% positive, rating the movie 7 out of 10, 11% mixed, rating the movie 4 out of 6, and 41% negative, rating the movie from 0 to 3. Now, it's hard to judge how reliable these scores are because we don't know who's seen the movie, but many people who theorize that a movie is being review bombed both positively or negatively think that it's suspicious when a user has rated a movie very high or very low, and it is the only movie that a user has reviewed on the platform. The theory being that it's a sign that someone came to the platform and specifically went there to inflate or deflate the user score of that particular film. I've seen people suspicious of positive reviews of the Odyssey on Rotten Tomatoes because the user had only reviewed that one film. And in fact, a key tenet of my case against the film Gotti years ago was that a high percentage of that film's positive reviews on Rotten Tomatoes came from users who had only ever reviewed Gotti. Now, on Metacritic, you can't see the history of everyone who leaves a user rating, but you can see the history of everyone who leaves a user rating and also leaves a comment. So I dug into the website and I looked at over 200 recent user scores that rated the Odyssey either a 9 or a 10 or a 1 or a 0. My thinking being, if someone is going to leave a rating in an attempt to review bomb a movie either way, they're not going to rate the movie a 6. 109 of those 220 ratings were either 0 or 1, and 111 of them were a 9 or a 10, so I was looking at a pretty even split. Of those who rated the Odyssey 0 or 1 and left a comment, 50 of the 109 ratings, or 45.8% of them, were from users who had only ever reviewed the Odyssey on Metacritic. Of those who rated the Odyssey 9 or 10 and left a comment, 34 of the 111 ratings, or 30.6%, were from users who had only ever reviewed the Odyssey. So despite an almost even split between those rating the Odyssey very high and those rating the Odyssey very low, it was more common, by about 15%, for the lower user ratings to be left by people who had never reviewed anything on Metacritic before. And if only reviewing one movie ever on a platform is a sign that a user might be trying to manipulate a movie's score, then the low scores on Metacritic are more suspicious than the high ones. So let's move on from math and user scores and talk about a couple of other statements that have been made about the Odyssey, not about attendance or user ratings, but the film itself. Both of them predate the release of the movie, and the first concerns where the story of the Odyssey comes from, mainly the assertion that the Odyssey is an insult to Greece. This stems from a lot of things: Christopher Nolan's choice in armor and ship design, the modern dialogue of the film, and the casting of the film, featuring mainly American and British actors, and also featuring Lupita Nyong'o and Elliot Page in supporting roles. This has been painted as an insult to Homer and to the Greeks, and has even driven Elon Musk to pledge that his AI Grok will produce a, quote, historically accurate version of the Odyssey by the end of the year. So, is the Odyssey an insult to Greece? Well, a good place to start is probably to try to find out what the Greeks think. Greece does not have its own equivalent of Rotten Tomatoes, but what they do have is something called the Pan-Hellenic Critics Association, or PEC. It was founded in 1976, and it's the equivalent to an organization like Critics' Choice here in the States. PEC has a website, and on the website, there's not only a listing of the critics who belong to the organization, but a database that links to their latest reviews. And thanks to the miracle of Google Translate, you can read at least 26 reviews of the Odyssey from Greek film critics on that site. I've listed all of the names on screen for critics whose reviews I've read right now, in case anyone wants to check my work. And after reading all those reviews, I'd like to say, first of all, that Greece has some really good film critics. The vast majority of them wrote deep, meaningful dissections of the film, the craft behind it, the acting, its themes, and also what they thought of the film both on its own terms and in relation to the original Homeric text. As I read the reviews, I put them into 3 categories, and I was pretty stringent on those categories: positive, mixed, and negative. And at the end, I came up with 19 positive reviews, 4 mixed reviews, and 3 negative ones. To translate that into a Rotten Tomatoes score, even if you count all of the mixed reviews as negative, the Greek tomato meter would read 73%. Still fresh, though not as fresh as American critics. And definitely not the reception that you would expect for a movie that was an insult to Greek culture and history. Here's what some of the Greek critics who liked the Odyssey had to say, translated from their original Greek reviews. Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is an achievement of mythical adventure, and we consider it an achievement mainly because of how much he respected Homer's epic and its timeless messages. The worst thing is that for those supposedly offended by the quote violations of the ancient text, it is doubtful that they've come into contact with it beyond its children's editions. An adaptation that wholeheartedly adopts the path of classicism but incorporates as many modern elements as necessary, just as the rhapsodists who recited the Odyssey to eager listeners throughout the centuries did. What we can certainly judge is whether the director managed to overcome the obstacle of time and speak about the universal values and timeless messages of the work in today's conditions, and in our opinion, Nolan managed to do this while remaining quite faithful to the myth. And finally, not only does he not, quote, falsify, a word that means nothing in art, but he respects and reintroduces the Odyssey to younger generations, which pays tribute to Homer and the Homeric epics, which highlights the unlimited possibilities of cinema to converse with other arts. Not exactly a group of people insulted by Nolan's take, but critics are just one piece of the puzzle. If the Odyssey's an insult to Greece, then surely it's being snubbed by the citizens of Greece. I mean, why support a film that's an affront to your heritage? But if the Greeks themselves are upset by the Odyssey, they are forking over a lot of money to sit and be offended in person. In its first 4 days, the Odyssey was reported to have sold 151,415 tickets in Greece, which tracks box office by admission numbers. This marks, according to the Greek news sources I found, the best 4-day opening weekend in 20 years, dating back to 2006, and the opening of Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest. And if the people of Greece who saw the movie on opening weekend were incensed, well, then they've told all their friends because attendance appears to be steady. Here's what today's first IMAX screening looks like at One Village Cinema's location in Athens. Here's the second screening of the day, and here's the third. Those helmets don't represent empty seats. And if the government of Greece is angry at Christopher Nolan for his take on the Odyssey, well, they're playing it pretty cool as well. It was reported this week that the country's Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, had a video call with the director, and it apparently wasn't to chew him out. According to a statement from the Prime Minister's office, Mitsotakis thanked Nolan for the film's contribution to strengthening international interests in ancient Greek civilization, adding that such productions bridge Greece's rich cultural heritage with contemporary creative art. Are there any people in Greece who are upset by the Odyssey? Yeah, I'm sure there are. I mean, hell, Emily Wilson, who wrote the translation that Nolan based his script on, absolutely trashed the movie this week, while also saying that the movie was an event to celebrate for spurring interest in the original poem, including her version. But most Greek critics enjoyed the film, and the Greek people are turning out in numbers that haven't been seen for decades. So if there was offense caused, it seems far from universal. And finally, let's get to maybe the original conspiracy theory about the Odyssey, and it concerns the casting. Ever since word broke that Lupita Nyong'o was playing Helen of Troy and Elliot Page was cast as Sinon, though he was misidentified as playing Achilles for weeks, many of the same people who are now casting doubt on the film's success also accused Christopher Nolan of casting those actors because the film wouldn't be eligible for Best Picture at the Oscars otherwise due to the Academy's diversity standards, which went into effect a few years ago. So, were Lupita Nyong'o and or Elliot Page only cast so that the Odyssey could be eligible for Best Picture? The answer, in short, is no. And the answer at length is also no. The Academy diversity requirements have been controversial and misrepresented, intentionally or unintentionally, since they were announced a few years ago. They've been in effect for the last 3 Oscar ceremonies, so starting with movies that were released in 2023. Under these rules, in order to be eligible for Best Picture, the only category for which these rules apply, a film has to meet 2 out of 4 standards set by the Academy in an attempt to encourage and increase diversity in the film industry. Now, it is true that one of the 4 standards does include the cast of the movie. It's called Standard A, and it covers on-screen representation. To meet that standard, one of these criteria must be met. One of the lead or significant supporting actors is from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. 30% of the actors not submitted for Oscar consideration are from 2 underrepresented groups, or the main storyline of the film is centered on an underrepresented group. Now, this standard, Standard A, is frequently presented as the only standard a movie has to meet in order to be nominated for Best Picture, meaning there are no other requirements. Meet this or you're not eligible. It's why so many say that Nolan only cast Nyong'o and Page to cynically check a diversity box in order to win the Oscars. I get multiple comments a day here on the channel saying this, and have for weeks every time I talk about the Odyssey. Elon Musk basically started a personal crusade against Christopher Nolan because of this, accusing him of selling out his integrity for awards. But Standard A is not the only standard a film must meet in order to qualify for Best Picture. There are 3 other standards, and they include Standard B, where 2 creative leadership positions, 6 key crew positions, or 30% of the film's overall crew belong to at least 2 underrepresented groups. Standard C, where the film's distribution company, financing company, and or production company offers paid apprentice and internship opportunities or training opportunities to underrepresented groups. And Standard D, where the studio or film company has multiple senior executives or hired consultants belonging to underrepresented groups. Again, a film only has to meet 2 of these 4 standards to qualify for Best Picture, and according to Variety Awards reporter Clayton Davis, every single winner of the Best Picture Oscar, going back to the 1920s, would still qualify for the award based on standards C and D alone. In short, Christopher Nolan could make a movie where every major role is played by a white dude, a movie that includes only a couple of meaningful roles for women, and still win Best Picture. We know this because Christopher Nolan did make a movie where every major role is played by a white dude, a movie that included only a couple of meaningful roles for women, and it did win Best Picture. It was his last movie, Oppenheimer, which was released in the first year that the Oscar diversity standards applied. So if the argument is that Nolan only cast Nyong'o and Page to check a diversity box, well, he has 2 Oscars sitting on his bookshelf that prove otherwise. There are a lot of theories I've talked about today where I present data that I think strongly indicates an alternate answer, but this one is just flat out wrong. And I have seen countless comments, tweets, and posts that show a fundamental misunderstanding of what these diversity rules are and how they work. That's actually why I'm not a huge fan of them. Not because they're overly restrictive, but because I think they're almost ludicrously broad. I think the intention is good, but the effect does basically nothing to change what's eligible for Best Picture and only opens the door for misinformed, unfair, or flat-out false criticisms that these standards represent a draconian woke litmus test used to bully directors into casting people they don't want to. For his part, Nolan has said that Nyong'o was always his first choice to play Helen, and that he was desperate for her to take the part. Nolan has also said that he thought Elliot Page brought a special quality to Sinan, and that he was happy to reunite with him years after they worked together on Inception. And back in July, he called the criticisms of his casting choices, quote, irrelevant, because, quote, no one having those conversations knows what the film actually is yet. And I want to focus a little bit on that word, irrelevant. Now, I'm done going through theory, so if that's what you're interested in and you don't want to hear a little bit of commentary, I get it, and I appreciate you watching. But as I mentioned before, this is the second time I've done an extended video addressing conspiracy theories aimed at undermining a big blockbuster film. And both times, these theories have largely been couched inside the same framework, a quest to fight back against wokeness. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who has some beef with the Odyssey frames it that way, but the ones with the loudest voices generally do. I usually avoid this topic on the channel because I found that it mostly causes more trouble than it's worth. I'm shouting into the force of a hurricane on a platform where channels that focus on wokeness, quite frankly, have a reach many times larger than this one. But I think that this angle plays an integral part in almost everything that we've talked about today. When a movie that gets the woke label fails, the story is easy to write. The quote-unquote real people recognized what was going on, rejected the woke ideology of the Hollywood elite, and proved that audiences don't want woke movies. Supergirl failed because it was woke, not because it was a fairly generic film with an uninspired script that was released at the end of the superhero boom. Snow White failed because it was woke, not because it was an unfocused remake of an almost 90-year-old film that no one really asked for, featuring nightmarish CGI dwarves. This is not a narrative I'm making up. Type in those two movies and lots of others and the word woke on YouTube, and you'll find videos saying this exact thing, reaching hundreds of thousands or even millions of viewers. But when a movie that's labeled woke, like The Odyssey or Captain Marvel, succeeds, things get a little bit more complicated. The success has to be tainted. The audience scores are rigged. The box office numbers are fake. The critics are corrupt. The answer can't be that audiences either ignored or flat out didn't even know about the film being labeled woke, because that would make Christopher Nolan's word, irrelevant, applicable. And it can't possibly be that the Odyssey's wokeness was irrelevant to most of the audience, because if the wokeness is irrelevant, what does that say about those who spent weeks fighting against it? It reminds me a little bit of the end of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, where he perches on the mountain to hear the Who's wailing because their holiday was stolen, but is shocked to hear them singing instead. Because to the Who's, Christmas wasn't the cynical holiday that he thought it was. There were a lot of people waiting on their mountains a couple weeks ago, perched and ready to enjoy the catastrophic failure of the Odyssey, but it didn't happen. Maybe, when it comes to whether something is considered woke or not, to most people, movies mean just a little bit more. I don't know, maybe I just want to go back to the days when we talked about most movies based on their plot or their characters, or whether Superman should have snapped Zod's neck. Oh, how I yearn for the simpler days of Zack Snyder discourse. So that's a little bit of legwork I did on some of the theories floating around about the Odyssey. What do you think? Do you think that any of these theories hold any weight, or are you just tired of it all? Let me know down in the comments below, and as always, be sure to stay tuned right here for the latest in movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.